I thank my friend from Texas for yielding, and let me say that was a real eye-opener. That was a real, I knew from seeing some of the things, having read some of the things previously, that BP certainly was claiming big green activities, both in their ads on television and other places. And I do remember reading in the National, I believe in the National Journal, some articles about their activity on behalf of climate change, but it didn't really sink in until this very minute when you read this to me. And I'm going to bring something up that's a little tongue-in-cheek humor, but I have a question I wanted to ask, because now you've talked about the difference between what we talked about, which was global warming and climate change. When I went to school in Lubbock, Texas, back in the 60s, I remember specifically a day when a bunch of buddies and I went out to play around the golf. It was 89 or 90 degrees. We were in a pair of golf shirts and Bermuda shorts. We started out playing around the golf. Before we got through with 9 holes, a dust storm came up, and we could hardly see the ball and we could hardly hit it. Then it began to rain, and it rained mud for about an hour through the dust storm. And then as the dust seemed to calm and blow away, the temperature began to drop. And by the time we got to the clubhouse, the temperature was 20 degrees. So we had had a climate change from 90 to 20 in a 10-hour period, including a dust storm and rain. And we know that climate change is George W. Bush's fault. How did he do that? Because that certainly was the most spectacular climate change I've ever seen in my entire life. But unfortunately, we all know in Texas, we have those climate changes all year long. Is that the Republicans' fault and the Bush administration's fault? Good Lord, where were they in 1964? I think he was probably in junior high school or something. I don't know. What do you think, Mr. Gohmert?
Well, reclaiming time, it appears that apparently former President George W. Bush must have had an awful lot of activity to have that kind of effect on global warming even back then. But then I find it interesting because I know my friend calls seeing the articles as I did. In fact, I recall in college being told that we were probably at the very beginning. Some said we absolutely were at the very early stages of a new ice age that would end the world, end all people on the world with ice. Well, I just didn't believe it because as a Christian, you know, the Bible doesn't teach that the world ends with an ice age. And so I just knew that couldn't be right. But the people all around me were saying, oh, yeah, we're at the beginning of a new ice age. It's the global cooling. It's going to ultimately have the whole planet frozen solid. And then who knows what life forms will emerge, if any, after the big ice age. Now, I remember that. And I remember the discussions and discussing with classmates and things. And I just could not buy back in the 70s that we were at the beginning of a new ice age. So I come into this thing a bit skeptical. And as I've said many times, there's an adage here in Washington that no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. And this is exactly the kind of thing that makes you see that. It just creates too much cynicism.
If the gentleman would yield for a moment, I would argue that we enhance our cynicism quite a bit by the article that you just read concerning the relationship between the Obama administration, the Democratic Party, and British Petroleum prior to the leak, the massive disaster in the Gulf. You need something from the... So, you know, you have to be a cynic when you see the kind of who's blank am I going to kick attitude out there. And, of course, everybody knew who we were talking about blank that was going to get kicked. and that was going to be